uh, Gateway Center of Excellence in Rural Health lecture series, where we are opening the gate to understanding rural health. Today's date is April 14th, 2026, and the topic is Grief We Carry and the Roles We Inherit, Mental Wellness in Rural Families. My name is Sage Milne, and I'm your moderator for this webinar and a research assistant at Gateway. Before we begin, I want to acknowledge the land. The Gateway office is located on the ancestral land of the Anishinaabe, Haudenosaunee, and Neutral peoples. It is part of the Huron Tract Treaty number 29 and the Saugeen Tract Treaty number 45 and a half. As we discuss the complicated relationship between grief, land, and loss, the connection between land and identity is substantial. As part of Treaty People, we promote respect towards and between the land and people. The keynote speaker is Lorraine Van Ewyk, co-founder of the National Farmer Mental Health Alliance, registered social worker, and a PhD student at the University of Guelph. Joining her are Diane Bergsma, co-founder of the Three Oaks Respite Cabin, and Ben Tobias-Murray, Farmland Access and Agricultural Planning Coordinator at the Ontario Farmland Trust. The views and opinions of many speakers in this webinar may not reflect Gateway's, but we believe in providing a platform for meaningful discussion. And now we'll pass it on to Lorraine.
Thank you so much, Sage. And boy, is it ever a pleasure to be back with Gateway. I appreciate very much Gateway's work with farmers and with researchers, their ability to tie the two together. I'm not sure if we have any University of Guelph professors on here today, but if so, it's an extra special hello from a student. I'm going to go ahead and share my slide deck here. Just take a second to populate. Okay. I think, Sage, can I get a thumbs up just to make sure? Yep, it's all good. Okay. So the grief we carry, the roles we inherit. Grief in agriculture is sometimes a little bit more of a unique experience. It certainly can play an experience of being multifactorial impact. We often call that complex grief. There's another form of grief, and it is called complicated grief or prolonged grief. And we're going to be talking about that today, just so that we can really give ourselves some space. I know that there's farmers on the call, there's also researchers on the call, and there's mental wellness therapists or support networks on the call. And so we're going to try and kind of navigate all of those needs between those that are presenting with us today. Real quick, at the National Farmer Mental Health Alliance, our goal is to ensure that farmers, their families, and communities have credible resources like what we find at Gateway to reach out and get support whenever needed. There was some recent research that came out that talked about the fact that many farmers recognize they need support and they don't know where to turn to get that support. And so that's part of the goal between today's webinar and some of the other work that we've done with Gateway is to ensure that there's access for people who are looking for support. I do want to mention real quick, Three Oaks Cabin, as Sage mentioned, you're going to be hearing from Diane a little bit later as well. And it's always a pleasure to chat with Diane. So I am a PhD student at University of Guelph. I also am a sheep farmer. We have just come through lambing season. So for any farmers on there, it's a little bit of a hoop hoop hooray at this point. We have one ewe left that's just hanging on for dear life. And other than that, we have a number of healthy lambs just bouncing around the farm. So it's quite exciting. We also own an on-farm store and bakery, and I'm a foster mom. And so I have the privilege of kind of dipping my toe in many different areas of this world and some of the unique aspects that I experience as a farmer and as a student and as a therapist. Before we get into the conversation, if it's okay with you, I'm just going to lead you through a really quick exercise. The reason for this is we all have stuff. The reality is none of us are immune to hard things. And grief, although maybe a shared experience, it's also a very unique experience. And so some of the conversations we have today may be, I don't like using the word triggering, but for lack of a better word, it may bring up some things in you that you thought had been completely dealt with and wouldn't bother you anymore. And sure enough, here today, something has caused a bit of a bother. And so number one, it's okay to take a break from the webinar and come back to it. It is being recorded, as Sage had mentioned, and so you can come back to it if it's feeling uncomfortable. The other thing you can do is you can practice this deep breathing skill. It has a way of lowering our response, our defensiveness or our concern, and our heart rate and our respirations. All those things can settle down and allow us to get through the hard memories or the hard things. So really quick, one of the things we teach when we teach deep breathing is to relax your body. Sometimes, particularly, not to throw all the farmers under the bus, but they kind of get all tense. They're like, okay, I'm ready to take a deep breath. And we don't want you to do that. We want you to take your shoulders up to your ears, let them drop, and then sit into your saddle for those of you who are horseback riders, or for lack of a better word, just kind of roll back on your pelvis and slouch. And this is the way that you want to start breathing. This is the status of your body, is to be in a relaxed place. So it's also called sniper breathing. We're going to inhale through our nose for 4 seconds. We're going to hold for 4 seconds. We're going to breathe out through our mouth for 4 seconds, and then we're going to hold for 4 seconds. So we're going to go ahead and do this together. Shoulders up, let them drop, feet flat on the floor. Go ahead and slouch a bit. 1, 2, 3. Breathe in and hold. Breathe out and hold. That's it. That's deep breathing. It's a super skill though, so go ahead and practice it even when you're not feeling alarmed or stressed. But today, if the stuff comes up, there's a tool that you can use. This is a little bit of an outline, the experience of grief in agriculture, how it's different than what we might typically see in non-agriculture communities. There's one section that's really prominent in agriculture is how our identity, our roles, and our relationships change in light of grief. Certainly, our lifetime goals can sometimes change in light of the grief that we experience. I also want to be sure that we understand that when we talk about grief, it's not just this uniform experience. Like grief doesn't just hit us if we've lost a child or a spouse or somebody to a farm accident or to suicide, although those are huge considerations for grief. Sometimes grief is the ongoing loss of animals and livestock on our farms. Sometimes grief is bankruptcy. And so grief can look different depending on each individual's experience. And so we're going to explore that and how that's different on the farm. We're also going to talk about resilience. This is a word that gets tossed around a lot, and I'm going to say unfortunately. I think it's unfortunate that we toss resilience around all the time. We want resilient communities and resilient health and resilient finances and resilient education systems. The problem with that is nobody has defined resilience. And so what we see in agriculture is coerced resilience. And coerced resilience, we're going to learn more about, but it's a really important piece of grief journeys for folks in agriculture and rural areas. And then I'm also going to talk really briefly about agriculture-informed therapy, just to ensure that people know where they can reach out to for support and some of the care guidelines that would be provided through that experience. So, all right, I'm going to start off just talking about a little quote here. This is from an Iowa farmer, it's a recent research article, and was talking about grief. And this individual had 2 fingers, I believe, that had been cut off in a farm accident. And he says, like, of course, the first thing you think about, and this is what, as a farmer, the first thing he thinks about is like, okay, am I going to bleed to death? Am I going to die? And then it flips to, am I going to be able to farm again? What are we going to be able to do again? Right? Like, how is this going to impact my farm? And so he talks about the fact that it was a setback, and that those initial thoughts when something like that's happened is, what's my life going to be like after this? And for farmers, we find this a lot. When a tragedy happens, we typically are not focused on ourselves. When a farmer is in an on-farm accident, maybe a leg is crushed. I had a cousin who was involved in a tractor accident and experienced a crush injury. And he said, my thought wasn't like, oh, I'm in pain, or, oh, I won't be able to walk again. My thought is, how is this farm going to survive? Right? And so because of that, there's this responsibility often that as farmers we feel that can be very significant in how we process hard things. And we're going to touch on trauma here. And I know that sometimes that word trauma gets thrown around or that, it causes a reaction in us. Just again, take a little bit of a deep breath. Trauma is not the actual event that happens. It's how we process that event. I often tell the story of when I was a teenager. I think I was maybe 17 years old. My friend Erin was driving a car. She had a nice new, turned 16 red kind of sporty car. And she had picked me up and three other friends, and we were driving to catch a bus to head to Toronto to go to a concert. And we were listening to some music, and I had told her, "Oh, you need to turn left up here. You need to turn left up here." And she said, "Where?" And so finally she figured out where she was had to turn, and she hauled on that wheel, and she lost control, and we hit five trees and a house. Now, we all walked away from that accident. We all did. Erin was obviously very devastated, but my parents came and picked us all up and took us into the town. We got on the bus and away we went. And we made a joke about the accident the whole way to Toronto. Now, that's not because it wasn't traumatic. It's because it's how we process that at that time in our lives. Now, for other people, especially for instance, if they had had a car accident earlier in their life or there had been other trauma, that experience could have been really significant in their lives. And as I get older, the research shows that when we experience trauma as a child, when we experience it as an adult, we have an amplified response. So with grief upon grief upon grief, it's harder to process. When we experience trauma upon trauma upon trauma, it's harder, it's bigger to process. The other thing that's important to know is when we think about trauma, we tend to think of the big T traumas. That's what Gabor Mate would call them. So we think about, major life-altering accidents. We think of being a victim of a serious crime. But there's three different forms of trauma. One of them is generational trauma, and we actually see this in the agriculture industry. Generational trauma can last on the DNA, so it's done through epigenetics, we call it, which is receptors on the DNA. And it's transferred down to 4 to 5 generations. Some researchers would say as much as 7, but by and large, the agreed upon response is 4 to 5 generations, and that's if no further trauma occurs. This is why in the Indigenous communities, we still see the impacts of trauma. And I've heard people say before, "Oh, well, that wasn't me, that wasn't my grandparents." Well, actually it was, because we carry this trauma down the DNA. And so same with farmers as well. Post World War II, we had a great influx of farmers to Canada. Well, prior to World War II, particularly in the Netherlands, there was a great famine. And that famine caused farmers to come to Canada in more of a survival mode. They were looking to survive because they weren't surviving well prior to that experience. And so when those farmers came to Canada, they worked really hard. In fact, I remember in my husband's family, OPA controlled the money. And if you were in grade 4 or older, you went to work and you brought home that money, and that money was saved meticulously. And OPA made the decisions as to who needed what. If somebody needed a bike, well, they needed it to get to work. And so they would find a used bike. But if Johnny needed new shoes, well, he could suffer through and shove his shoes into a smaller sibling's shoes, and off they would go. And so that generational piece is really impacted now relationships and attachment with kids, and when we see those generations later. One of the other pieces is direct trauma. And so for farmers, that can include extreme weather, even soil degradation, animal loss and illness, on-farm accidents, and of course, suicide. One of the last categories that we won't talk about very much today is called vicarious trauma, and that's where we bear witness to other stories. We might touch on it a little bit later, but the main pieces to be understanding about is that generational piece and that direct piece. So why does place matter? Why does living in a rural community matter? One of the pieces to be aware is oftentimes our grief stems from an on-farm event. It might be livestock loss. It might have been a barn fire. Our neighbor recently had a barn fire, and so it could stem from that. It also could stem from if there was an on-farm accident. I think of the families that I've worked with whose child or spouse have died or been significantly injured due to that on-farm accident. It can impact our grief process because every day we go out to that same space and we're reminded that this is where our loved one was injured or this is where our loved one died. And so place matters. Sometimes the farm is our only source of revenue and keeping going, and it's also our source of grief. It's a very complicated relationship where we can love this place and all that it gave us, the memories it gave us, but we also can hate this place because it was the place where so much devastation happened. One of the other pieces of those who are impacted within grief is sometimes the burden of caring for others outweighs our burden of caring for ourselves. And so in agriculture, we have a lot of people who depend on us. I won't forget, the stories of people who I've talked with grief and the number of people that came to them actually looking for support. In an idea, they thought they were offering support, but they were really looking for support. The number of people that depend on you for different reasons as your role changes, as your relationships change, all of those impact that grief process. So, what are some of the changes in community and relationships? I want to talk real quick about succession planning. Succession planning, just so everybody knows, in Canada is largely an underdeveloped experience. I think only 11% of farmers have a written down succession plan. That lack of succession plan is problematic just because of that lack of succession plan. However, when a tragedy strikes, when grief strikes, that succession plan is impacted. I'm thinking of a fella I know who was a dairy operator and lost his farm. Didn't lose his farm to bankruptcy, lost his farm due to a fire. Now, in theory, insurance should have kicked in, and yes, all of those pieces, the quota, perhaps could have been replaced. But the impact of the loss of that fire, what most people didn't realize is he had endured previous fire experiences as well. A loved one had died in a fire, and so the impact of that loss was cumulative, and he could not go back to it. And so with it, the succession plan completely died along with it. Excuse me. And so when we experience grief and tragedy, our succession plans are also impacted as well. Not just our succession plans, but our children's and our grandchildren's hopes and dreams can be impacted as well. And with that can come another level of grief, another level, in some cases, of shame. I've certainly worked with farmers who have experienced bankruptcy, and their grandchildren were looking to take over the farm. First, their children and their grandchildren was always the plan that they would become the seventh or eighth generation farm. Bankruptcy prevented that, and with it came shame and guilt, along with grief, because of that lack of ongoing farm status. Some of the other changes in community, we have depopulation, and I recognize that this doesn't typically kind of fit the form of talking about grief, but it does. When we see depopulation, we see a loss of support services in our rural communities. When I look at, I actually grew up in the area where I currently farm, which is a huge opportunity, and my uncle was the neighborhood veterinarian. And everybody spoke so highly of him. But when I was a kid, there was a hardware store here, there was a grocery store, there was two banks, there was an automotive replacement area, there was a local veterinarian office, aka my uncle, and along with some convenience stores. There was some farm implementation. There was a mill, which is still here, the Brigden feed mill. There was a number of industries that were operating in our small town. We no longer have a grocery store. We no longer have no longer have a hardware store. A number of those industries have closed due to depopulation and accessibility increasing. And with that comes grief, because for some people, the culture of a rural community is also impacted as well. There's a reduction in critical services. Our off-farm income requirements increase. I remember a number of years ago, my husband and we were still quite young. Our children were very young, and I was homeschooling our children. which was a huge blessing. And I was so appreciative of it. But one year we lost 75% of our lamb production. And I did everything I could to save those lambs. I was tube feeding them. I was feeding them colostrum instead of their mom's colostrum. I was giving them antibiotics. We had had the vet out a couple of times, and we continued to lose these lambs no matter what I did. And I remember being kind of crumpled on the floor of the barn, and I was looking up, and our veterinarian was looking down at me, and he had no answers. We had shipped 6 of the lambs away to Guelph to be tested. And they came back with basically they've got some sort of a bug in their gut, but we don't know what it is. And it had caused a type of paralysis or something to that effect. I don't remember the details now. So with it was the grief of losing those animals. There was the shame that I felt that I couldn't fix them, the guilt that I couldn't heal them. And that was my job, right? My job is to care for these animals. I couldn't do it. And then because of it, our children, we couldn't afford for me to stay home and homeschool our children. I needed to go back to work. And so our children were then sent into the school system, which wasn't a great experience for a couple of them. And so I felt guilt as a mom that I had then put them in that position. And I felt grief over the fact that I couldn't be home in the way that I had hoped to be. But we required that off-farm income. Otherwise, we would have lost our ability to continue to farm to the degree that we were, because we just couldn't make ends meet otherwise. So understanding that when we experience grief, there's actually multiple factors, and much of it centers around the occupation of farming and the business itself. I'm not sure, Sage, by the way, if anybody has a question or answer, feel free just to stop me or let me know if anything pops up. I know that sometimes when we're talking about these complex issues, I'm happy to answer as we go if needed. I want to talk real quick about complex grief, and I had kind of given you a little introduction to it in the opening there, but complex grief is just where it's this multi-layer, and I just kind of referenced a story for it, but I'll go through a couple other ones there. A lack of understanding for the loss outside the agriculture community. What we know now is there's a greater distance between the consumer and the producer. And so in 1931, 1 in 3 people were farmers or directly connected to the agriculture community. Now it's 1 in 376. And so, even when I start to talk in academia about the needs of farmers when it comes to our wellness, there are so many folks in academia who go, "Oh, I had no idea. Like, I didn't even think about the fact that farmers might be struggling." And both in Canada and the US, there's some significant pieces there. One of the pieces that makes grief more complicated for us on the farm is the lack of understanding of the loss outside the agriculture community. So recently in this lambing season, we had a great lambing season, but very early on, I had a ewe mom, so that's a female mother sheep, who had triplets, and all 3 of her triplets had died. And I couldn't save her. She had turned septic. I couldn't get them out in time. We had tried, and of course, we're in contact with our vet, and we had tried numerous opportunities or numerous initiatives. And ultimately, she and the lambs had all died. And so I don't share that conversation very easily with people outside the agriculture industry because of a lack of understanding of what that looks like. And part of that even comes down to animal rights activism. As farmers, sometimes we're quite afraid about sharing our stories because of animal rights. If people misunderstand what goes on a farm or what that looks like. I was talking to our lawyer and I told her the story, and she's like, "Oh, I'm a vegetarian." And she said, "I had no idea what that would be like." And it is different. It is unique. It certainly is not easy for any of us to go through that experience of loss and then not feel like it's well understood outside of the agriculture community. And so the fallout effect, it can involve our kids. This individual, his name's not really Dan, I've changed that out, but when he was 17, he suddenly was required to take over his family farm. His dad had died in an accident. And Dan, at the age of 17, was given an option. Either you take over the family farm, and that means your younger siblings and your mom can stay on the family farm, or you go to work and you become the teacher that you wanted to be. You're going to have to sell the farm. Your family who's grieving the loss of their husband and dad are going to have to move off the farm and lose all of that sense of stability And so Dan said yes to I will stay home and farm the family farm. He had wanted to become a teacher. He never got to become a teacher. And so there's this complex grief where he had lost his dad, but he had also lost his future dreams and aspirations as well. Diane, I know you're much better at sharing your story, but the follow effect and complex grief, Diane will share about, I'm sure, about how that impacted them as far as of having to pick up some of the pieces that were left behind after their loss, doing chores for their loved one, having to distribute assets, or all of those pieces. Parents then have the loss of the grief of losing their child, but they also have added responsibilities that at that stage of life they hadn't intended to have to pick up, that kind of banner. Finances, fewer people able to work. I'm thinking of an individual on the farm right now who was in a farm accident and was then hospitalized for a long period of time. Their spouse, the other primary farmer on the farm, was then having to care for them both in hospital and upon recovery and getting home. And so the farm was not, they could not do the regular farming duties. And so those duties were then hired out. They had to take out a significant loan in order to cover those costs and they had a lot of difficulty even finding somebody who could take over those responsibilities and do it as well as they did, which didn't happen. And so there was higher loss that year and less yield, less production. And so with complex grief, you've got all of this changing as far as the fallout, but on top of that, our finances are impacted as well. And altered plans, we've talked about succession and bankruptcy, the grief of bankruptcy, but the grief of I don't have anything to pass on to my kids. I think about Tom from Homestead Organics, and he tells this story a lot about how that impacted when he felt so proud of what his parents had built, and he was proud to take it over and kind of champion it. Inevitably, they ended up declaring bankruptcy, and he felt so much grief, not just for the loss of the business, but he felt grief for those that had invested in his business and for the farmers that had depended on him as well. Now, complicated grief is a little bit different. It's also defined as what we call prolonged grief. And so we tend to think about this as grief. It typically comes about from trauma. So we typically think about it as grief that is just so significant it changes who we are. Well, in agriculture, this happens often. We have a change in identity. We have a change of sense of self. Our lifelong held goals have changed. We also have suspended grief due to duties when we have a young mom whose spouse has passed away in a farming accident or by suicide. They're not actually able to go through the grief process because they're very quickly thrust into I have a business to take care of. I've got to keep these, pigs growing and these chickens producing so I can provide for my family. Because if we don't, then what happens, right? So they end up suspending that experience of grief, which prolongs it into a longer experience. I want you to know that grief avoidance is not intentional, but it is inevitable in agriculture for these reasons. Oftentimes we see this change of identity where I used to be so-and-so's spouse. Now I am my own farm owner. And so there's a huge change in identity, particularly when I think about spouses who have lost a loved one, a spouse, where it used to be a team, it was a partnership. And now that other partner is suddenly gone. And so that identity significantly shifts. No longer are you one of two. You are, everybody depends on you. And the learning curve is often very steep after that event. Lifelong held goals are completely changed, right? Where we anticipated this farm growing and our kids coming up and taking over the farm and growing and thriving, those lifelong goals are no longer. And it doesn't just impact that individual's view of self, it impacts all of the different other areas related to agriculture. So just real quick, we want to talk about resilience here. It refers to the capacity of individuals. This is a definition that we've developed. It refers to the capacity of individuals and systems to navigate adversity through flexibility, skill development, and adaptation to change, while also recognizing hardship and fostering healing, connection, and growth. The reason for this is oftentimes in agriculture, resilience is championed like we just get down and we just get dirty and we just get the job done. I often show a video by a seed company, and it shows, this is the life you were born to live, and you were, you don't clock out, you don't clock in. This is a 24-hour get dirty, get the job done kind of career. And unfortunately, that's actually championing coerced resilience, where we look for high level of productivity and task completion no matter at what expense. Meaning we conceal our emotion, we conceal our psychological and all the systemic struggles that we experience, all in the goal of reaching a level of productivity. And as farmers, we're production minded. If I don't produce a certain number of lambs, I can't produce my bill. I can't pay for my bills. But coerced resilience is actually a constrained adaptation. We don't learn from those experiences. We hold the grief of those experiences. Whereas authentic resilience means there's efforts of an individual to embrace vulnerability and to seek out emotional healing and recovery from chronic stress. This means we pivot. This means we learn new skills. This means we reach out for support from other individuals. And so we're really looking to invite and develop programs and education that celebrates authentic resilience rather than coerced resilience. That's part of what you'll hear from Diane talk about as well at Three Oaks Cabin. The goal is authenticity. Really quick, I just want to tell you about agriculture-informed therapy. This is a therapeutic model where therapists learn how to work effectively with farmers. And that therapeutic approach is important as you look to gain services. This is the Be Farm Well app that we're developing. This is intended for farmers to have some resources at their disposal at any time. So care guidelines, if you're a farmer, this call is, of course, we're meeting all different needs, but if you're a farmer on this call, seek out an agriculture informed therapist in your region. If you're looking for some support, understand that we would encourage that. And then the other piece is show yourself some self-compassion. Understand that grief is a beast. We don't just conquer it, definitely not in one day or in a specified period of time. It's a journey. It's a very personal journey. When my brother and sister-in-law experienced the death of their son, what they would say is soon afterwards, they had to make a decision. Yes, we're going to survive this together, but B, we're going to give each other permission to grieve differently, because your experiences, even though it's a shared experiences, your relationship and your experience and your memories with that individual are very different than the person you're closest to. And so we have to be able to show ourselves some compassion when things fall apart, and we have to be able to show other people who are grieving that, but understand that you're on your own personal journey. You're both heading towards the same horizon. You might be in separate boats right beside each other, but you're in your own boat and you're navigating your personal loss as well. I also encourage you to recall sweet memories. Learn how to let those drive you and heal the hard memories and heal the hard pieces, and then be willing to dream differently. Sometimes we tend to lose all sense of dreaming. We sometimes, after grief, it seems to steal from us that future-minded goal. But one of the ways that we honor those that we love, because love is costly, it means that when we loved a lot, we hurt a lot. And when we love our farms a lot and we lose our farms, we hurt for that. We do go through a grief process. And we can allow ourselves to dream differently. Tom from Homestead Agriculture, he's one of those guys. He's one of those guys who came back. He said, I learned to dream differently. I'm going to kind of turn it over to Diane now, if that's okay. There's a couple little pieces there, but I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing. And Diane, I always treasure your story, and so I'm so glad that at this point I can turn it over to you and learn more about grief from your perspective.
Thanks, Lauren, and also thank you for the invitation here today to join this conversation. Certainly, grief has hit our family hard, and some of the things that Lauren was speaking about earlier about the complex grief and how it changes your life. It shakes it on its axis and yeah, life is never the same. But as I start this call, as I listen to Loren, it's also okay to give yourself permission to dream again and to hope again and to live again, and that doesn't come with any guilt. So I'm Diane Bergsma. I'm married to Al, and we have 7 lovely children. We farm hogs and cash crop near Shetland, Ontario. Not a very big metropolis. I think it has 6 houses, but we're very happy in this countryside, and we live in a wonderful, wonderful community. My husband Al did a stint in the Air Force, and in '95 we settled on the farm where we are now. And our son Dallas was our 3rd son, and he was a scrappy little fellow. He was in the barn in the shop every minute he could with Al as soon as we were landed on the farm. And for his 6th birthday, we got him some laying hens. And from then on, he thought of himself as a full-fledged business partner and sold eggs to every feed salesman and seed salesman that came in the driveway. He took them to church to sell them there. And slowly but surely, he built a little bit of a nest egg for himself and started buying and selling machinery, so that on his 18th birthday, he was able to buy his own farm with his own money. And he just kept expanding. He bought more land. And in 2018, he built a new hog facility to add on to his production. And the build went terribly from beginning to end, and it caused a lot of stress. And Al and I built a similar barn in 2019. And that was all with the idea of this succession plan that Loren was speaking about earlier. We did have a plan in place. We had not written it down. We had an understood plan, and we were working on writing it down. But there was definitely a pathway to where we saw our future going and what we fully expected to happen. But as we were building and expanding and cleaning up and redoing our businesses, we didn't understand, we didn't see, we didn't recognize the incremental amount of stress, the mountain of stress that was building on Dallas's shoulders. Looking back, I can think of conversations, and if I'm not careful, I can be filled with guilt that as a mother, how did I not see that he was suffering the way he was? But Dallas was the kind of guy that you could come to, everybody went to him. He was the go-to guy in our family and on the fire department that he was a brother on. He always had a smile, always had an answer, and was always ready to help. So where there is much regret, I try very hard to not let it sink into guilt, where I didn't see it as a mother. And our son was suffering so much that on November 23rd, 2020, he died and left us by suicide. And our family was crushed. Like, we didn't see it coming. We were absolutely blindsided. The loss of our son, the loss of our brother, our friend, our business partner, our future farming dream, it was all just shattered and obliterated from one moment, from going to the barn that morning, we went to do chores together, to a call later on that afternoon, where's Dallas? And the trigger that we have been able to piece together, he should have, had he been in a healthier mental state, been able to shake that off. So his actual trigger amount was negligible, but on top of the mountain of stress that was already there, he couldn't see the way out. And so at our family, very soon after, Loren talked about identity, we decided together that this tragedy could not and would not give us a new identity or become our identity as a family. We're a very faith-based family, and we knew our identity is ultimately wrapped up in Jesus, but also as we live our life here on earth, we wanted it to turn into something hope and life-giving. And so we built a three-bedroom log home in our woodlot, and we called it Three Oaks Cabin. 3 because our Dallas was our number 3 son, and he was number 3 on the fire department. And we offer that space free to farmers and first responders who are in need of a mental reset or a mental break, or just who are suffering from fatigue in any way due to the nature of their occupations. And so people can go on our website, just access it like they would an Airbnb. There's a banner right on the homepage of our website where they can go through a mental health, just a little bit of a review, a questionnaire, and all that information goes straight to our partners at National Farmers Mental Health Alliance. We're very grateful for our partnership with them because we know that our guests will get assistance from people who have agricultural knowledge and appreciate the pitfalls and the triumphs of being a farmer or a first responder. So guests, while they're at the cabin, have access to self-directed programming that has been developed by the National Farmers Mental Health Alliance. And when they return home, they also receive a follow-up call and an offer of therapy through one of their therapists. So we feel that we're very grateful for the way it's set up because there's a number of guests that have been able to tap into therapy where it would have been difficult for them to pick up the phone and say, hello, I'm so-and-so, and I need help or I'm stuck. So we're very grateful for this opportunity that when we offer help or when we offer or acknowledge what other people might be going through as a farmer or a first responder, that it gives our family hope and permission to live again and to live life with joy and with gratitude. And so, yeah, ultimately, Three Oaks to me as a person who went through this grief sums up that it allows me to live again. And I just want to touch base on what Lorraine said about how it alters you, like your world just stands still. And in the months following the loss of Dallas, how often there was like you'd feed his pigs, but he would never benefit from it, right? Or you go to the farm where he lost his life, and yeah, they just walking that farm, wondering, was this where it? Yeah, it's just those very tremendously hard moments. Canceling his membership for farm memberships and things like that, or when you get pieces of mail that something is canceled, it just felt like he was slipping away. And I wanted to scream to the world, this isn't good. And this, how can you guys all just go on living? Don't you know everyone's like, the world has altered, but there was no place like that. And so we wanted to provide a place where people either who are grieving or just going through the grief of often a difficult life on the farm or as a first responder, where we can, if nothing else, offer hope and a time of rest. And so we hope that many farmers still come. And if there's any farmers or first responders on the call today, this is your personal invitation to just check out the website and take a plunge, take your wife, your husband, your children, or drop the children off at grandparents and just come and enjoy a little time of rest and allow it to be our way of acknowledging and honoring what you bring to our communities. And I think with that, I'll just hand it over to Ben.
Perfect. Thanks so much, Diane. I'm just going to share my screen real quick. Oh, I'm at the beginning. Okay, let me just go back really quick.
I see the end, the thank you.
Perfect. And then I just need to get oriented.
There we go.
Oh, okay. Sorry, I'm just having some technical difficulties. Okay. All right. Is it coming up now, Sage? Sorry.
I can see it clearly. Just hit present and it should go.
Oh. Okay. I am without my speaker notes, but that is all right. I can carry on as we go. So perfect. Okay, so good afternoon, everyone. I want to thank Gateway for allowing me the opportunity to present today. And thank you so much, Lauren and Diane, for sharing what you had to say today. It was just an absolute privilege to sit in on that. So welcome, everyone. My name is Tobias-Murray. I work as the Farmland Access and Agricultural Planning Coordinator at Ontario Farmland Trust. And I'm going to talk to you all a little bit more today about what we do at OFT, as well as speak to a little bit of today's topic, which is alleviating mental health within rural families. So just as a super quick overview, OFT, we are a charitable nonprofit that was founded in 2004 by the University of Guelph after identifying the rapid rate of farmland loss occurring within Ontario. So we are a conservation organization focused on farmland protection, and we are the only provincial-wide land trust dedicated to protecting farmland. So, as an organization, our mission is to protect and preserve Ontario farmlands and associated agricultural, natural, and cultural landscapes of food production for the benefits of Ontarians today and future generations. And so we do this in a number of ways. Primarily, our bread and butter is what's called conservation easement agreements, which I will touch a little bit more on during this presentation, but we also do this in a number of other ways as well. I specifically work with our Farmland Access Program, which provides farming opportunities to new, young, and underrepresented farmers who otherwise wouldn't be able to access farmland. And then as well, I also do a little bit of policy-focused work. So we're touching on all different things, but primarily our focus is working to protect agricultural, natural, and cultural elements within Ontario. And so to date, OFT has protected 31 farms amounting to 3,200 acres of farmland across Ontario since our incorporation. Now, I feel like it's important that I also touch a little bit on the state of agriculture within Ontario and why the work that we do at the Ontario Farmland Trust is so important. So as I said, Ontario loses 319 acres of farmland today. And that number has pretty much doubled since the last census that was conducted back in 2016. And so with that, we also see that a number of farm operators are set to retire within Ontario. So RBC released a report back in 2023 called Farmers Wanted, which essentially analyzed and found that 40% of farm operators are set to retire by 2033. And of these farmers, 66% of producers do not have a succession plan in place. And then with this, we also see the added development pressures that are occurring on farmland throughout Ontario, from commercial development to the rapid loss of farmland we see occurring to accommodate housing, as well as other infrastructure projects. Now, I know that is a lot of, I'll call it doom and gloom, but it's also important that we focus a little bit on the tools that we are using to combat these pressures facing agriculture. So I want to talk about farmland easement agreements. So farmland easement agreements, or CEAs, and I'll refer to them as CEAs just because that's a little easier, are voluntary, legally binding, permanent agreements. And so these go on the title of the land and they run with the title of the land. And these are negotiated between the landowner and then the group that is working with the landowner. So in this case, the Ontario Farmland Trust. And again, we register the easement on the title of the land. And as I said, these are voluntary agreements. These are not forced onto the landowner. And what this does is this essentially limits the future use to agriculture and conservation purposes only. Essentially meaning, as I like to put it, your farm, if you choose to sell it later on or whatever happens with the future of your farm, it's going to remain in agriculture. So for example, an external group could not come and purchase the farm and turn it into something that is a non-agriculture use. So there's also no threat to private property, there's no threat to private property, meaning it does not affect the land ownership or farm business practices. So a common question we often get is, if I have an easement agreement on my property, does that affect my ability to farm? And the answer is no. So our easement agreements are designed to allow for farming practices to occur. And these are also an effective tool for succession planning, essentially because it ensures the future of your farm. The land is going to stay in agriculture. And then as well, the current landowner retains ownership, so the conservation rights are donated to OFT. So I'm going to talk just briefly about sort of the financial piece related to conservation easement agreements. So when we move to do a conservation easement agreement, what happens is we come and we have a third-party appraiser do an appraisal of the property to assess the property's current fair market value. And then what happens with that is an assessment is then done after an easement is placed on the property. So what essentially happens is with the fair market value of the property before an easement is placed, and then the value of the property after an easement is placed, the difference in price essentially triggers a charitable tax receipt, which then would go to the landowner. And the charitable tax receipt is essentially the difference between the fair market value before the easement and the fair market value after the easement. And you're receiving a charitable tax receipt because when you register a property as an easement, you are donating the property rights of that property. So for example, say you had a farm that was appraised at $1 million, and then you put an easement on it and it was worth $800,000, you would receive a charitable tax receipt for $200,000. And again, this is because you're donating the conservation rights of that property. And so the tax benefits and financial considerations. Often the reason why farmers also can be attracted towards conservation easement agreements is because of the charitable tax the tax benefits and financial benefits of a conservation easement agreement. So an easement, as I said, is considered a donation of the property or the conservation rights of the property, and these have a public value. And because of this, the tax benefits that you receive from your charitable tax receipt can be used for up to 5 years. And then there's also other tax programs that farms can qualify for. One is the Ecological Gifts Program, which is operated by Environment and Climate Change Canada. And essentially this will assess if there are species at risk on your property or other ecologically sensitive features. And if your property qualifies as an eco gifts property, you can actually use your charitable tax receipt for up to 10 years. And on top of that, capital gains is waived on your property from the point of protection. So I know I threw a lot at you here in terms of the financial workings and how a conservation easement agreement works. However, I wanted to make sure that I was tying this back to today's topic, and that's CEAs and their relation to succession planning. And essentially, CEAs ease the uncertainty of the future. They give autonomy back to landowners and farmers who feel that they are unable to see the future outcome of their farm. And because of this, we often see how CEA is sort of part of the legacy for farmers, even with those who do have a succession plan in place. And with that, it's also important to look at the impacts that we've personally been able to see from CEAs on current properties. These are just some quotes that we've had from some recently protected properties. And again, we see this repeated element of how the farms represent, farm family legacies. So having that extra layer of protection with the CEA allows to ensure that and bring that into the future. And when we protect farmland, we are safeguarding a vital resource for our children and their children after them. So I know I probably went a little over on my presenting time, but I just want to thank you all so much for the opportunity for allowing me to present here today. I've just attached a bit of information as well. So there you'll see my email as well as Joel and Neela. Joel oversees our conservation easement agreement program, and then Neela focuses on our Southwestern Ontario region for OFT, or Southwestern Ontario focused properties for OFT. So feel free to take a photo of that screen, and yeah, would be happy to answer more questions either now or at a later date. So thanks so much, everyone. And I'm going to stop sharing my screen.
And I want to say thank you to all the presenters that really shared. We really were taken through a bit of a journey where we're talking about grief, farmland loss, but then we brought it together with looking at some of the resources that are available to really redress some of the things that arise. Now, if anybody does want to add a question to the Q&A below, you are more than welcome to. We do have a limited time now, and I do want to ask a question actually to Loren. So Dr. Andrea Bitton-Jones, a researcher at the University of Guelph, has advised the that prevention through emergency plans or otherwise is a key part of responding to stressful challenges that arise from crop failures, disease outbreaks, or barn fires. Why is prevention such a critical component?
Yeah, Andrea Jones is fantastic. I'm always excited when I read some of her research. When we talk about prevention, it takes and developing those plans for prevention, it takes the initial emotional response out of our decisions. In fact, after somebody experiences grief, as a therapist, we would recommend don't make any major decisions for 2 years, right? Because we sometimes are thrust into this place of emotion and loss, and so we make those decisions that we later sometimes regret. Sometimes we wish we could go back and change those decisions. And so when we have a plan in place or when we've done some of those preventative actions, it does provide us with a bit of a cushion, so that when or if tragedy were to strike for whatever reason, we've got a guideline at least to go by. That doesn't mean we have to stick to that guideline entirely. I think it's very important that people be given some freedom to understand that we're impacted differently. Like if you talk to anybody who's experienced grief, and I bet Diane will tell you this, there's this moment in time where it was like life before Dallas died and life after Dallas died. And my brother and sister-in-law, when they lost their son, we would say there was, them before Mikhail died and then life after Mikhail died. Because the reality is we are so drastically changed when we experience such a deep form of grief. And so it's important to have those plans in place, but it's also important to surround yourselves with professionals and folks that can kind of help you navigate when that plan doesn't apply, because we've changed, we've been changed due to grief.
Thank you so much for that. And I do have a question for Diane. What other programs or services inspired the Three Oaks cabin model of care?
Actually, that came about a few years earlier, when I'd sought out a therapist for some other things. And there was one time I remember in a discussion, I said, I think I can have it figured out, or I think I can figure it out. I just need a place to be where I can just be by myself and have no interruptions, have a place of peace and a quiet. And do you know of any such place? That I asked the therapist, like, I'll pay for it. I just need a space where I'm safe. I feel safe, where I can let my thoughts and my heart be vulnerable to me. And she said, Diane, I don't know of such a place. And if you ever find out about such a place, then please let me know, because myself and every other therapist in Ontario would love to offer something like that to people who are just tired and wore out, or who can't see the forest for the trees. And I remember that discussion coming to mind very shortly after Dallas died. And when we as a family said, we have to take this and use it as a seed and not as an end of the road. We're going to plant this and we're going to make something beautiful come out of that. That's how it kind of came about. I thought maybe we can make a place of refuge.
Thank you so much for sharing that. And now, Ben, this might be a little bit more of a technical question. So if you look at the Q&A, Ruth Milady asked, has the Ontario Farmland Trust experienced any new landowner of a property subject to a farmland conservation easement, which is requested to remove the easement to provide a greater latitude of future land uses?
Yeah, so this is a common question that we often get. And the way I'm kind of interpreting it as well is sort of, can an easement be expropriated? Can something override an easement? And so to start, so once you register an easement on property, it is on title for 999 years. So it's not going away in anyone's lifetime. If I'm to answer the question in short, can someone force an easement off? The short answer is no. There's no evidence for an easement being expropriated within Ontario, as if this did happen, this would trigger a massive response from all land trusts across Ontario as well. And then in addition to the an easement can only be taken off title if both the current landowner agrees and then the current or the land or excuse me, the organization. So if it's let's say it's the OFT, if the OFT agrees to the easement being removed as well. So there's several things essentially that have to happen in order for that to occur.
Thank you for answering that. And now we're wrapped up. So thank you to all the presenters for the webinar. If you do have any thoughts, I'd invite you to reach out to the presenters to talk with them further. We'd also like to thank the following sponsors for their continued support. Without them, the lecture series would not be possible. These include CIBC Wealth Management, DeJager Town Square IDA Pharmacy, Hurontel, Libro Credit Union, Lighthouse Money Management, McEwen and Fagan Insurance, Zehrs Goderich. Gateway is a not-for-profit organization with charitable status, and we greatly appreciate and welcome any support we receive. We will be continuing this conversation on May 5th with Dr. Wayne Caldwell, who will be talking about planning, climate change, and electrical vehicles. So I hope everybody has a wonderful day.